The Warsaw Uprising of 1944 remains one of the most tragic and controversial chapters of World War II. As Polish resistance fighters rose up against the Nazi occupiers in a desperate bid to liberate their capital, the Soviet Red Army stood on the opposite bank of the Vistula River, within sight of the city, yet did little to assist. The question of why the USSR didn't help the uprising has sparked decades of debate among historians and continues to haunt Polish-Russian relations. This article explores the military, political, and strategic reasons behind the Soviet Union's inaction during the Warsaw Uprising. The uprising begins. On August 1, 1944, the Polish Home Army, Armia Krajowa, loyal to the London-based Polish government in exile, launched Operation Tempest, a nationwide campaign to liberate Poland from German occupation. In Warsaw they began a large-scale uprising, expecting help from the rapidly advancing Soviet forces just east of the city. Key factors behind the uprising. The Home Army wanted to free Warsaw before the Soviets arrived, to reassert Polish sovereignty. There was deep mistrust of Soviet intentions and fears that Stalin intended to install a communist puppet regime. The uprising was expected to last only a few days, assuming Soviet support would be imminent. The Red Army stalls at the Vistula. By mid-August 1944, Soviet forces had reached the eastern outskirts of Warsaw and were positioned across the Vistula River. However, despite repeated pleas from the Polish resistance and Western allies, the Red Army did not cross the river to support the insurgents. Instead, Soviet forces halted their offensive, and Warsaw was left to face the fury of the German counterattack alone. Possible reasons for Soviet inaction. 1. Political motives. Stalin saw the non-communist Polish resistance as a potential threat to Soviet post-war influence. The Home Army was loyal to the Polish government in exile in London, not to Moscow. A successful uprising would strengthen Polish nationalism and independence. By allowing the Germans to destroy the Home Army, Stalin removed a major obstacle to communist control. 2. Strategic and logistical constraints. Some Soviet commanders claimed that the Red Army had outrun its supply lines and was too exhausted to mount a fresh offensive. German counterattacks had temporarily stabilized the front, making immediate support difficult. While there was truth to logistical challenges, many historians argue these excuses were exaggerated to mask political motives. 3. Refusal to support Allied relief. The Western Allies tried to airdrop supplies to the insurgents, but needed Soviet permission to land in Soviet-held territory. Stalin delayed or denied access to Soviet airfields, severely hampering Allied efforts to aid Warsaw. This deliberate obstruction reinforced the perception that Stalin wanted the uprising to fail. The outcome of the uprising. The Warsaw Uprising lasted 63 days, until October 2, 1944. Around 200,000 Poles were killed, including many civilians. The Home Army was crushed and survivors were imprisoned or executed. The Germans systematically destroyed much of the city after the uprising collapsed. The Red Army resumed its advance months later, entering a ruined and empty Warsaw in January 1945. Aftermath and legacy. The failure to support the uprising allowed the USSR to consolidate control over post-war Poland. The Soviet-backed Polish Committee of National Liberation, a communist administration, was installed shortly afterward. In Poland, Stalin's betrayal of the uprising became a symbol of Soviet duplicity and imperialism. The Soviet Union's failure to aid the Warsaw Uprising was a calculated decision driven by political strategy rather than military incapacity. By allowing the Germans to eliminate the Polish resistance, Stalin cleared the way for Soviet domination of Poland after the war. While some logistical and operational factors may have played a role, the broader picture reveals a cold geopolitical calculation, one that cast a long shadow over Soviet-Polish relations for decades to come.